Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Rob Jr., and this is my channel, Creative Rob. Thanks for tuning in. And today we're going to be working on the third painting in the beach scene series. So let's get started. To start off, let's choose a nice baby blue color and use the airbrush, the soft airbrush, and we're going to outline the two sides and the top of this canvas. And now we're going to use the Gaussian blur and blur that out so it blends right on in, leaves a nice gradient from blue to white. Now, if you guys have been following along, this is just using the first painting and second painting and putting everything that we learned together to create something just a little bit more realistic. Alright, so on another layer with a darker blue, let's create the horizon line. This is where the sky meets the water, and we don't want that to be directly in the center of this canvas. That's not very good design. It's not pleasing to the eye, and it'll give your painting a very amateurish look. And so let's create a new layer. And now we're going to create the waves. And we want to just create these diagonal lines. And use the Gaussian blur. And blur those out a little bit, not too much. And I'm going back to the horizon line and lowering the opacity a little bit. Alright, with the selection tool, let's create and choosing the ellipse, let's create a circle. And here I'm just centering the circle with the selection tool. And of course this is going to be our sun. And I inverted the circle just like we did in the last two paintings. Use the soft airbrush. And I thought I'd change it to orange, but I left it white, so that's why you can't see what I just did. So I'll go back in and make sure I choose orange. And since this is inverted, it only gets the outside of the sun, which is exactly what we want to do. And now we're going to add the Gaussian blur and just blur that out a little bit. And here I'm just messing with the brightness and colors. If you didn't see what I did, I added a new layer, and I'm just adding the yellow in with the airbrush, and I was adjusting the saturation and that kind of thing. And here I just want to add a little pink, a little bit of that sunset color, and I want to blend that out. And here I'm kind of messing around with what it looks like on different layers. I want it to blend a little bit differently. Okay, on another layer with a darker purple, we're going to start creating the clouds, and we're going to create the first one right on the horizon line, and then we're going to do another one just like that. Just create a nice cloud shape. And when you get towards the end, you might want to make your brush smaller. It's easier to work with. And here I have the smear tool, smudge tool, and I'm just smudging out the tops of the clouds, making them a little more fluffy. I start adding the Gaussian blur, but I believe I undo that because I want to create the rest of the clouds first. And here I'm just adding a highlight to the tops of the clouds. Again, I'm going to undo this because I want to add the rest of the clouds first. But I was having an issue with because where the layer is placed, I was having an issue of not getting a pure white. So I had to move that layer to the top to get that pure white color. And this is pretty much just an experiment here. Alright, now I'm like, okay, I need to add the other clouds before I go into huge detail. And here I'm just using the smudge tool to create some more shape and fluffiness on the top of the cloud. Now I'm getting a darker color for the base of the cloud. This helps give it shape. And I use the smudge tool to kind of blend it in a bit. And now I'm just messing with the saturation and brightness and hue, seeing what colors look better. Alright, so on a new layer at the very top of your layer list, with your soft airbrush at a very low or small brush, I start highlighting the tops of the clouds. Just kind of helps give the feeling that these clouds are backlit. And give it a little bit of a Gaussian blur and lower the opacity a little bit, just so it doesn't stand out quite so much. Alright, so on a new layer, let's give the water a nice green color. You can actually choose any color you want, but if you're following along, sort of a tennis ball green. And use a Gaussian blur to blur that out and lower the opacity a little bit. So what happens when you do this is it makes the green a little bit more see-through and looks like it has reflection. Alright, so here with the selection tool, using the freehand option, I'm creating the sand dunes. I believe I copied and pasted that so it went on a different layer, and now I was using some white to give it a white color. I accidentally put it in a group. I didn't want to do that. And now I'm trying to move it up in the layer list so that the blue lines don't shine through or show through. I just put it on I tried using the alpha lock. I was having some issues with that. See how it's going on the outside. Usually when you have the alpha lock it doesn't do that, but it's because I didn't have that selected. So what I end up doing is using the selection tool and selecting the inside of that white sand so that way I can airbrush it. And in here I'm just resizing So here I'm looking into adding some shadow to the sand. I'm just trying some things out, seeing what works best for me. Adding the Gaussian blur to that. And now I want to add some sand, but I chose the wrong brush here. The brush we want to use will be under elements, and it's this snow. And I just chose a purple and now a brown, and then I'm going to use a white. Kind of looks like Florida, Pensacola. Now I'm going back to the airbrush. And just adding more shadow to that. Don't forget to use the Gaussian blur. Kind of blends it in a little bit. And now I want to add some highlights to this. And it's just a little effect, doesn't do much. It helps a little bit. So using the selection tool, give me the ability to just do inside of this and not hit the outside of the shape. And again, I'm going to use the Gaussian blur and lower the opacity. And here I just put those layers together, pinched them together. Let's create a new layer. And we're going to start with the palm tree. We're using the studio pen to do this. And again, when you press, the harder you press, the thicker your line is. So press hard and go up light to make it smaller. And then you're going to add 5 stems. Let's make another one a little bit shorter. Add 5 stems. And then we're going to go into each of those stems and add the palm. We're going to add the individual, give more shape to this and make it look like a palm tree leaf. So I just do one side, and then on the other side I just do a couple. Very easy to do. It makes a very nice looking palm tree. Now I'm just adding a little more shape to the top and giving the illusion of coconuts. Making it a little thicker too. It was a little thin at the top. Now I'm going to add a little bit of texture to the trunk. And now we're adding the beach grass, whatever that's called. For symmetry, adding another one to the other side. It's always good to throw these long stemmed plants in also. Maybe I should have researched the names before I did this. Alright, let's create another layer, and we're going to create an island in the background. I'm just kind of giving it some shape here. Now, the further it gets out, the skinnier you want it to be. And let's create some palm trees. Remember to make these a lot smaller than the ones in the foreground, so because this is what gives it distance. and just giving the trunk some shape, texture. Now, if you guys are following along and you finish this, feel free to tag me on Instagram. It's creative_Rob. I would love to see what you did. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Alright, on another layer, let's create the shadows using a dark bluish purple. And then I got the smudge tool to create some shape. And now I'm adding the Gaussian blur. And lower the opacity. Let's go into the hue saturation and mess with the saturation and lower the brightness so it gets a little darker and gives it more of a shadow look. I was going to add some beach grass. I think I started off way too strong with this. Basically, I end up using a very, very dark green, and then yeah, because everything I'm trying here is just too bright, and you lose that effect of it being far away. Or being black because the sun's back there. I started tapping on it and got more of a effect of bushiness, and then I go to the saturation to lower that so that it stays really dark, and it just kind of gave a little shape to the island. Now what I'm looking for the roughs is a rough skin, and I'm choosing a color for the palm trees base, the trunk of the palm tree. I chose an alpha lock, so I only hit the palm tree. And I do have the opacity lowered, so it's a little bit see-through. Now I'm going with a brighter to hit the very edge. And now I'm moving on to the grass. And I'm not doing the whole thing, I'm just doing the tips. I want to leave black in there for shadows. Here I just wanted, it was hard to see the tree stem, so I added a little bit more. And now I'm moving on to the leaves. Again, I don't want it all green, just the tips, and then I get a brighter green, do the very outside where the sun's hitting. Here I'm just pinching the layers together. And I'm messing with the hue for the sun. I'm really just experimenting to see what I can do to make this look better and have a interesting color scheme. And I moved on to the clouds now, and I'm doing the same thing. And now to the water. I mean, when you do this, the mood of the painting drastically changes. It's kind of interesting. I'm very picky, obviously. Alright, so it looks like I chose the aqua. And now on a different layer, we're going to use the airbrush tool and create a highlight. And use the Gaussian blur to blur that out. And it gives a nice reflection on top of the water. And on another layer, we're going to use the luminosity brush. You gotta be careful with this. It's very powerful and it's easy to overdo it. Alright, so onto the sand. Again, I'm going to mess with the hue. Alright, so here I'm just pinching it all together and I want to adjust the hue as a whole. All the layers are combined, so every layer is being affected. Alright guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you haven't yet, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I hope you guys had fun following along, and if you did, feel free to tag me on Instagram, creative_Rob. I'd love to see your work. This is the last one of the series. There's a Beach 1 and Beach 2. I'll leave them in the descriptions if you want to follow along. Thank you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.